Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Fabulous. My name is Daniel Atkinson, and I'm a programmer here at the MCA, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the organization to today's event, Politics of Poetics, Layli Long Soldier, and Tanya, Lukin, Linklater, held in conjunction with the exhibition Dwayne Linklater, My Mother's Side, on view until September 3rd, curated by my colleagues Carla Acevedo Yates with Iris Colburn. Before we get to the conversation, if you could please check your phones, double check your phones. The silence here is going to be very important. Thank you all for coming, and thank you also to our generous funders, a full list of which you can see here. Before talking about tonight's event, I also want to acknowledge that the MCA sits on unceded Potawatomi territory, that the Ojibwe, Ottawa, Peoria, Miami, Mascoutin, Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and other nations have also lived, gathered, and traded in this region, and that today Chicago is home to one of the largest urban indigenous populations in the United States. A few words about tonight's event. Politics of Poetics is a new series conceived and produced by myself and my former colleague, Cristiano Castillo, who's in the audience. Can we get a round of applause for Cristiano helping with this? I see you out there. It invites poets whose practices embody the political in writing, teaching, activism, and in their very being, to give readings and hold conversations with artists whose work does the same. Tonight, as I said, is the inaugural event of the series. It's going to unite our poets on stage, Layli Long Soldier and Tanya Lukin Linklater. A few words about them before I let them take over completely. Layli Long Soldier's 2017 book of poetry, Whereas, is an extended meditation on the complexities of family, language, and history, and an unflinching critique on the past and present of the United States' relationship to Native people. There's a full bio here. There's a lot of accolades. Its cover is, in fact, a still from a collaborative project between Dwayne Linklater and fellow artist Brian Jungan. The book was the winner and finalist of many awards, and it's personally one of my favorite books. Tanya Lukin Linklater's multidisciplinary practice cites indigenous dance and visual art lineages, structures of sustenance, and the weather. Over the past few days, Lukin Linklater has been staging open rehearsals at the MCA, responding to select works in the exhibition Dwayne Linklater, My Mother's Side, in collaboration with dance artists Ivani Abenmalo and Kinwin Gobert. Improvisation and slowness are at the heart of Lukin Linklater's rehearsal process, which offers audiences the opportunity to glimpse the intellectual, affective, and relational aspects of dance making. This project marks an exciting return to Chicago for Lukin Linklater, who previously participated in the Chicago Architecture Biennial in 2019. The two of them have been in conversation for quite some time, so we're in for a rare opportunity to hear them together tonight. Long Soldier will read first and then be joined, or is already joined on stage, by Lukin Linklater for a second reading and conversation. And with that, please join me in welcoming to the podium Layli Long Soldier.
Hi, good evening. I'm so pleased to be here, so honored. Thank you, Tanya, for making this happen. Thank you to the coordinators and staff here at the museum as well. And if we have any friends who are Ocheti Shakoin, Layli Long Soldier, Layli Akichita Hanska Imachiapi, Da Yahipi Nachante Washte Nabechi Usapi. It's good to be here. I came with a warm hand and a good heart, something like that. I'm going to read some recent work, some work that I made for a film titled Lakota Nation versus United States. It was just released this month in July. It should be available in theaters somewhere in your region. And if not, I think it'll be online soon. So the first part of this work in the black slides is some of the text that I gave to the filmmakers. The second part of the work is in white slides, and this is the work that I've made more recently with continuing along the same lines. Also, can we turn down the lights a bit? I think so we can see the screen a little better. And this light up here is killing me, so I don't know if that's possible. Okay, we're keeping this light on. Okay, I accept the terms of this relationship. Okay. I will be reading excerpts from a long piece titled 135 X's, which engages the 1868 Treaty of Fort Laramie. Among many things, this treaty between the U.S. and the Oceti-Sakowin and our allies, the Arapaho, promised the continued retention of our place of belonging and origin, the Black Hills. This poem is, at its heart, dedicated to the 135 Northern tribal leaders who signed our treaty in 1868. Red Cloud, who was among those 135 leaders, is famous for saying he was swindled. He said, quote, "I am not hard to swindle because I do not know how to read and write." This piece is an effort to address what our beloved leaders could not read and could not sign their names to with anything other than X's. Lakota Nation versus United States premiered at Tribeca Film Festival and has been acquired by IFC Films and will be available for public viewing in the coming year. I wish to thank the producers Ben Heaton and Phil Pinto and the directors Jesse Shortbull and Laura Tomaselli for generously providing footage of our land for this reading. X marks. A love that comes from Ikche, the regular and ordinary living of our people on this land for thousands of years. This is a truth that cannot be undone. Thus, it is powerful. X marks. A love for our land, entirely independent of treaty and policies, unconcerned with platitudes or speeches made by well-known spokespeople. X marks. An unusual declaration then, that I felt a love for our land long before I existed. X marks the strange ways of time, how a century ago can feel like yesterday. And quote, from this day forward, feels like never. X marks the hills, the hail, the hoe, the blade, the cut hay, the cut hair, the him, the her, the they, the them, their hold, the holding, on who, by whom is the hate, the hit, the hurt, the heart, is the harvest, is the how. This is a little dark. Does it seem dark to you? Yes. It looks great on my monitor here. That was a horsey, if you couldn't tell. You could. Oh, great. X marks. Chesapa, the name we have called the Black Hills for millennia, before any and all treaties. X marks. Pahasapa, another name used for the Black Hills, depending on the speaker. X marks, a word in Lakota language that also refers to the Black Hills, meaning suitcase or container, as in the Black Hills is a container for everything we need. I adore this. X marks an agreement. Whatever name we use to refer to the Black Hills, it is unquestionably the place of our beginning. And another X marks this land as ours, unquestionably by treaty. X marks the mystery of an X, a symbol for the unknown, a variable, or crossbones of danger. X marks the cross, the shape, the can't, the should, the shirt, the shoes, the school, the seat, the shift, the shunned, the shock, the sound, the shame, the change, the chair, the child within, my child beside me. X marks the question I ask my students. What does it mean when a person signs a document with an X? X marks the silence in a room when I ask this question. X marks the pause before answering, a deep breath as an immense psychological, emotional, and spiritual lineage rolls out before us. Our responsibility to rectify. X marks a line I once wrote. Everything is in the language we use. And X marks my humble correction. At critical moments, everything is in the language we do not understand. Okay, I'm moving into the second section, and this is where I am now going, I'm engaging with that treaty as I wrote in the introduction. But if you go to the last, I think I want to say maybe 5 or 6 pages of the treaty, but I want to mention you can do this with almost all of the treaties. So whatever region you come from, I recommend going to your treaties. They're almost always available online, and you can see the original handwritten documents. If you scroll to the last pages, you can see the signature pages. Almost all of those treaties are signed with X's. So I decided to go to ours, and this second section is engaging with those pages. So for our treaty, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, there are 5 different tribes that signed that treaty. So I started with ours, the Oglala, because we're the best. I'm just kidding. Tanya didn't hear me. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so here we go. This is names. I'd like to say a few words about our people's names, especially pre-1900s. This is what I know, though there's much more to share, I'm sure. First, Oceti people did not take last names or surnames in the way that European cultures do. We had our own names as individuals, men, women, and children alike. No person was the property of another. No one carried any particular matriarchal or patriarchal branding. We remembered the names of family members before us through lengthy introductions. And we remembered them as individuals, our grandmothers and grandfathers held in egalitarian regard. Generation to generation, we earned our names through our character, behavior, and deeds. And our names changed several times throughout our lives, depending again on our qualities, achievements, relationships, or virtues as we grew older. This Lakota understanding of human nature, the inevitability that people will change, and our way of upholding this as a basic truth is what I most appreciate about our older ways of naming. But I hope to be clear. As I write, I do not intend this to be an anthropological text to explain, define, or categorize our culture for non-Oceti Sakowin people. I wanted to say a few words about historical names because I am a poet. And I want, as a poet, to convey something of my indescribable delight in our ancestors' names. The language, the imagery, the embedded stories. One name is potentially a pivotal image within a poem, because we understood a name as an embodiment of essence, metaphor, and symbol. And a group of names forms a constellation, a structure of starlight that holds a poem together in interesting ways. To me, this is magical. I love my people for their poetry. They are born as poems. Their friends, their relatives, their community, together, their names form a cherished book with surprising turns. I hold this book to my chest. I read it again and again. Oglala. So I made these pieces, and I actually made them for our young ones, so that if they wanted to memorize our leaders' names, who signed our treaty, that maybe this would be something enjoyable that they would be able to remember, those little constellations of names. X marks: American horse, the blue horse, and man afraid of his horses together. X marks: forebears, bear hide, bear's back, bear with yellow ears, and one that kills the bear. Do you see the bear with yellow ears? X marks: black hawk, white hawk, and fool hawk. X marks: whirling hawk, whirlwind dog, and man that walks under the ground. X marks: little crow and black tiger. Here I imagine a black, glistening sheen down the hairlines of both our leaders, Little Crow and Black Tiger. I imagine them with different statures and different personalities, but a shared, recognizable shine. X marks Black Bull, Sitting Bull, and Poor Bull. X marks one that cuts off and one that presents the pipe. X marks red thunder, fire thunder, and mad shade. I actually love that name so much. I wish that my name was Mad, like, right? You know, Mad Shade. Oh my God. It's so modern too. X marks big mouth, bad hand, and bad wound. X marks grass and poor elk. X marks one that kills in a hard place and ghost heart. X marks the Blue War Club and brave. Here, footnote, here, I think of my child who shares the name of our leader, Brave, or as we say in our language, Ohitika. I think of our young ones, all of them, so brave. This section is dedicated to our children and youth. Wopila, thank you very much.
Chimai. I'm just really, really pleased to be here with my dear friend Layli Long Soldier, and also to be here at the MCA. I wanted to think a little bit about returning to this place, so that's been important for me to return to Chicago, to come back and to continue to come back. And also to continue to be in conversation with my dear friend Layli over the years. And also to be working with dance artists Kainman Gobert and Ivani Abanmalo, who I've been working with since 2013 and 2016. So it's really incredible to be here and to be in real space and real time with one another. So I'm going to read 4 very short poems, and 2 of them are from my book Slow Scrape, and Layli wrote the introduction and also supported the writing many, many years ago, but we can talk about that a little bit later. Yeah. Shook. a human being. Afognak dialect, the S is pronounced sh. It sounds like shook, but with a shorter O. Perhaps we shake, or past tense we shook. When are we shaken? An event score for Afognak Alutit 1-3, abridged. An Alutic person enters and says, "Our memory marks Afognak. Afognak marks us. What are we tethered to? What holds us together? When I am home on our island, I sense that the land exudes grief, this feeling. Many of us have left the land of our ancestors, perhaps because the grief becomes unbearable." So I should probably say that I'm a Shuk. I'm Shukpiak from Alaska. I'm from Afognak, the native village of Afognak and the native village of Port Lions. Yeah. A Song for Stars. Constellations are stars in relation to one another. We perceive the stars to be architected into forms, not atmospheres. These star structures come to carry different meanings over time by those who view them. Our bodies are comprised of cells, organs, blood, collagen, musculature, nerves, skin, hair, genetic material, hormones, bone, mineral constituents. Our bodies are organized. Our bodies carry invisible but felt meridians. Meridians are described in relation to flow, movement, and stoppage. Meridians remind me of unseen star formations. Meridians punctuate the body. Particles that make us make the universe. That particular text came about through a process, a choreographic process that I undertook in 2018 with Kainwen Gobert and Hanako Hoshimi Keynes, partly. And I remember really distinctly that we spoke of stardust and density and gravity and dissipation, and those have continued to be significant aspects of my movement practice. So the last text that I'm going to read, I wanted to share a little bit of background. The text is called Iwago, which is also the title of the rehearsals that I'm undertaking here in relation to Dwayne Linklater's My Mother's Side. And the phrase is Iwago oma aski. So I was reading a story online by Dr. Kevin Brousseau of Waswanipi. And Dr. Brousseau writes in this online space kept for Ininimuin, which is Cree language, and specifically Swampy Cree. And so he shared this story, which he said is likely one of the very first examples of a Cree, genuine Cree language at Toyokan. So this was first published in 1881 in a book called A Grammar of Cree Language under the name An Indian's Adventure. And it was collected by the linguist Truman Michelson in 1935 during his, or later, this is where it gets confusing when I was reading the story online. But later, there was another, Truman Michelson had field work in Moose Factory, which is up in Hudson's Bay, or James Bay, below Hudson's Bay in Ontario. And he gathered the story in syllabics and attributed it to Harvey Smallboy. So it's actually really nice to say the names of people from the older days, Harvey Smallboy. But this was read to Hilda Jeffries, who was a fluent Cree-speaking elder from Moose Factory, but she approved of the reading, and she corroborated the story as one that she was told by her late uncle when she was young. And the story is described as a dayokan, and I know that word. I'm not a Cree person, I'm not a Cree speaker, but I asked Dwayne Linklater to translate a dayokan, and he said, some people say it's a genre of narratives or stories, but also beings and ideas, unlike everyday things, difficult to describe when taken out of its connections. And then I asked him about this phrase, Iwago Oma Aski, and that was a very long introduction for this very short poem. Iwago Oma Aski. It's hard to translate Iwago. It has a feeling in it. It's almost a feeling word. This then is the earth. Dwayne Linklater learns Ininamoan from Nukum Nanak Mina Namushum Nanak in close study, felt over decades. These ones, they stay with language through ongoing efforts to disrupt our bodies, our thinking, our lands. We visit our words, their energy, the incompleteness of translation, our radical love of breath and motion, sound on air, throat sweep and call. I hear drift and grain in vowels of silty river, spongy muskeg, wind-swept tamarack, a clay that holds us as it held our ancestors. I am not a speaker of Ininamoan, nor am I Omashkego, Huishuk, yet Niwago Moak, and that means that I am related to them. Koyana, and now we're going to have a conversation. So I wanted to maybe say that Layli and I met in 2011 in upstate New York, and I live in north of Toronto in Nibising and Anishinaabe, so far from my own homelands. It's a beautiful community there. And I've lived there for a long time now, almost 15 years. But we met in upstate New York, and it was really lovely. She gave me really great feedback right away about a poem, and then asked me if I would contribute the poem to a publication she was editing. And a little while later, I asked her if she'd be willing to undertake a poetry mentorship with me, and she agreed. And for 6 months, we met every week or every 2 weeks, and we read together. And I produced some really wonderful works that, with her guidance, that then came to live in my practice for many, many years and continue to live in my practice, but also came to live in the book Slow Scrape, which I mentioned earlier. This was before Zoom. I mean, maybe Zoom existed, but we would Skype. And I lived on the reserve Nipissing First Nation, and she was in Sale, Arizona. And so we were in these small communities and sort of across that distance being in conversation. So I'm just so pleased that Layli, that we're still in conversation all these years later. I was really moved by your reading, both readings. We talked a little bit about it beforehand, and when I was in Santa Fe last time, I had a chance to see Lakota Nation at your house. But there's something different about hearing you say those words here in this moment and in this time. So I had a question for you. I don't know how well formed it is, but I've been thinking about the poetics and politics of time, and also the poetics and politics of land. And those are very large questions. But I feel that sense of time, that duration, that memory in the work, and also that deep love, specifically of the Black Hills, but beyond that as well. So can you say a little bit about either of those questions?
I mean, time and land are like the two biggest things. We could have a series of talks about that, I suppose. But I think maybe I'll go with my first impulse. So just even to hear time and politics within the same line, the same phrase, then suddenly I have to admit, like I get triggered. Like it pushes a button. Because I'm talking about in the sense of politics. So, and in the sense of US politics. And in the sense of being a Native person. And how I relate or understand myself in connection to US politics and time. So what I want to say is, as an artist, but even as an ordinary citizen, as a Native person, I think since I was young, I have always received the message societally that we should just get over it, right? So the work that I read tonight, for example, where I'm thinking about our place of origin, I'm thinking about our right to the Black Hills based on agreement, based on treaty, where I'm engaging with that treaty and the language of that treaty, where I'm thinking about what kind of life it may still have. Is it still a valid document if so much has already been broken? Or, So then all of those things can be dismissed like by something very simple as get over it. And that is the total erasure of time. Time includes those agreements. So, we have those if okay, I'm not going to try to make a parallel. I think it's enough just to put it in those terms, right? But the fact is our treaties are living documents. It took me a while to piece things together, but we have Supreme Court cases presently that they go before the court, and that court looks at our treaties and those agreements to come to its rulings. so they are still used presently. So I'm trying to put those pieces together. But then there's a sense of time. I mean, I was also thinking about you and I when we work together, let's say in a sense of time outside of politics, but in terms of being an artist and writing. I think about some of the conversations we had in writing, sometimes seizing that sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Right? So there is something that is tapping us on the shoulder. There is something that is nudging us, eating at us, or something delighting us even. And we feel that thing pulling at us that actually now is the time to write about it. So, and that came out of conversations where you were like, I don't feel like going into my childhood, my memories, and like dredging stuff up. No, we don't have to make a diary of pain, right? But we can, there's already a sense within us, I feel constantly, what we need to be doing, right? Because we're participating in this whole sort of growth together, right? So, yeah. And then lastly, I'm always thinking, okay, it is not just to follow this impulse of urgency, but also to attend to aspects of timelessness in our work and endurance and a kind of vitality that lasts beyond just the moment, right? So those are all things I'm thinking about with regard to time. Yeah.
I think I just want to respond and say that I've been thinking about two forms of time specifically since we had those conversations many years ago. One is the short form, which is this moment, this reading, for example, or this conversation, or the rehearsals that are happening upstairs at this time in this place. But there's also the insistence over long durations, right? And I think I have a different way of thinking about insistence, but we've had a conversation over time about it being a kind of iteration or a repetition, or like with each repetition a kind of deepening. And so I've been really framing my practice that way, is, in this moment, for example, we're going to, through embodied inquiry, investigate Iwago Oma Aski. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean in this moment right now? But there's a longer concern with land, with embodiment, with weather, with materiality, and I have a desire to sort of cite that time, that lived experience on the land, or that memory of my ancestors, my grandmothers and grandfathers, or to know that there was a time before settlers came, and there may be a time after, like a different sense of time, a longer duration. So those are also the ways in which I think about it. But I think that our kind of conversation in that moment where you encouraged me to respond to what was urgent meant that I was responding to what was happening in the world. And at that time, Chief Teresa Spence from Ottawa Pascat First Nation was undertaking a hunger strike for a treaty in Ottawa, on a small island in a teepee in the river. So I thought about that action, that embodied action that she undertook for treaty, to ask or to request or to demand the Crown or the Canadian government to hold up their end of the treaty. And I think that's often what I think about in terms of treaty is, as someone who is not treaty, I'm not, my community, by the time the American government came to Alaska, there's only one community in Alaska that has a treaty, it's Metlakatla, and they have a reserve.
Between the U.S. and Russia, that land was acquired.
That's right, so the U.S. bought the Alaska from Russia. And then we had an Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and so, but we didn't sign treaty with the American government, which poses some challenges for our own sovereignty today, right? We still are working through, or our political leadership are working through that. So as a non-treaty person from my community, I had to spend some time thinking about treaty in Canada, or what is known as Canada, primarily because of that action of Chief Teresa Spence that has stayed with me for a really long time. And so in the way that I understood it, as long as the Native people are upholding that treaty, the treaty does still exist. You know, even if the Crown or the US or Canadian government is not holding up their end. That's just something I wanted to mention, because of this sort of deep way in which you've been thinking about treaty over many years and the way in which you're writing about it. It's quite profound. There's no question there. But I'm gonna see if there's something that you would like to chat about, or that you have a question about, or if there's a specific thread that you want to pull from what I just shared.
I had a thread and now it's gone. So I'll make a new one. No, it's connected actually. You made me think about treaty and the way that I've been thinking about some of these agreements and some of these documents. Oh, first I want to say to you also that I'm known for certain kinds of work, like working with these documentary poetics, we would call it, engaging with treaties, engaging with the national apology, but that is not all I write. I do sometimes write about love and stuff like that too, I don't know. I do actually, but it so happens today, this is what we're talking about. So I like to be open to all of it. But this particular set of work, it is true that there's ways in which I've been engaging with this language for a long time, the governmental language and legalese, because it makes my blood boil. And because I feel like there are two ways in which we have come to this place as Native people of total domination. We are dominated, we are not. And the first is physical force, right? Total, we are overwhelmed by numbers and military power. There's just nothing we can do about that. The second is language. It is language that controls policy, that controls our rights to resources. If you have been watching the news, Supreme Court just ruled that the Navajo Nation had no rights to, they were suing for rights to the Colorado River and for modern plumbing. There's that the government should help in that effort, and the Supreme Court turned to the treaty and said there is no article in that treaty that says that the Navajo Nation can sue us for that. That is ridiculous. But there's no article in there that says they can't.
Yeah.
That's my argument.
Yeah.
You know. So it's this slippery, this little game that's played with language, and I feel like, I enrolled in law school last year because I was so mad. Anyway, I went for one semester and I could not continue, only because I could not maintain my artistic practice, the work that I do as an educator and a writer, and to do that, and family. It was like, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was still mad, and I loved what I was learning, and I learned a lot in just one semester. But one of the things that I also learned and appreciated is that as an artist, I have an ability to work with that language in a way that is completely outside of that domination and that control. And I think that we were talking about that yesterday, that there is a way. I physically felt it when the semester ended, and I could go back to my artistic work, my poetry and my writing. There is a place that I go to as an artist. I can feel it physically, like I go to a dimension. And it's a place that I see from and that I think. And as I told you, I think I was saying last night, I feel it's like my job is to think, but it's also to think otherwise. And it's in that place that I'm able to do it. And there's other people who live in that. You live in that place. And when we talk from that place. You know, I feel it. And so I felt like a spy. I went to law school and I and I learned so much. I learned how to use the database, Westlaw. I learned how to trace precedent, Supreme Court cases. There's just I learned how to write a brief. Oh my God, that was weird. So I got a lot of useful things out of it. But anyway, here we are. I don't know if that was helpful.
No, it is. I mean, I was thinking about how you also really, I remember some of our conversations many years ago where we were thinking about structure and how, and whereas you're responding to the apology, apology that was never spoken, that was a written document, and then how you're sort of structuring a response based on that structure. And I think that's quite powerful when you tell me that you can now trace precedent and you can also write a brief. I'm thinking right away, this is important. And you're also working with the X marks, the structure of the treaty and the signatures. And so I think my understanding is that there's 135 of those X marks, right? In relation to each of the leadership who signed or made their mark. Sometimes that's what they say in Canada too. I have a friend, Johanna Bird, who's writing also about treaty, and she was talking about how there was a gesture, like sometimes they would just touch the pen. There was something about that. And I think it speaks to these gestures of the X and these gestures of that touch. Somehow I feel like it's connected to what you're suggesting about how we're in relation to one another and how we sense and feel one another. And I picked that up in what you just said, which was there's a feeling, you can feel it when you're in that other dimension, that other place. And you can also feel it. I wrote that down. I felt a love for our land long before I existed. Or you said something else about feeling, and And it makes me think about that issue with translation, which is what Dwayne says. He says, it's hard to translate. It's a feeling word. There's a feeling inside of it. And so I've been thinking a lot about felt structures, which to me is sort of like this electricity between us that we can't see, but that we can sense and we pick up on when we're with others, or maybe as we enter into that other place, that other way of being. To me, it's like this deep cultivation of an inner life. That's how I think about it, like this place of staying with an image, staying with an idea, staying with a memory, staying with something, insisting on that staying over the course of our lifetime. For me, it's a kind of like practice. It's not necessarily an innate thing, it's like a repetition. You learn how to do it. You discipline the mind, or you train yourself to go to that place. Yeah, I don't know. Does this make sense? I'm excited about that conversation because it's usually only something that I have with dance artists. We talk about those things, about what I notice, what they feel when they're moving. And in that movement, in that embodied inquiry, they can make many different choices, which I think is quite liberatory. Like, it's incredible, the agency for this accumulation of all of these small choices that they can make. And I think that's also something that you're doing when you're writing. You're making all of these small choices that gather energy and sort of gather a kind of force.
Yes. I agree. Well, I don't know what to say exactly to the idea of repetition, except maybe I also think a bit about iteration. So I feel like every time I read something, it is not the same as before. And every time I use, even if I choose to repeat a particular word throughout a piece, throughout a collection, every time it's used, it is a different shape. It is a different tone, a different feeling. So, yeah, I think that we've talked about repetition and insistence and iteration many times. But yeah, it's beautiful. I was also gonna, for some reason too, I'm enjoying this. You made me think a bit about translation and some recent conversations. Like in the beginning of this, I mentioned the word ikje, which translates in English. The closest we can come is common, ordinary, or regular, which I just find so beautiful, like, because in our culture, it's, I feel like it's so beautiful because it's sort of a counter, what am I trying to say? It's counter to like American value system. So it's, if you can believe it or not, to be common or regular, I love saying, I just feel regular, is actually a virtue in our culture. It's a virtue to be among the common, to be regular. It doesn't mean that you don't, like, whatever you may do, whether you make things or you're an educator or you're a healthcare worker, you always do your best. So that doesn't apply to, you're always doing your best, but you're a regular person, Tanya, and so am I. And that's beautiful, right? Why was I going there? I was just thinking about translation. Oh, the feeling. Oh, I know why. It was another conversation I had recently too. this idea of love, which I think I identify as the thing, that feeling really that binds us. You know, it's like the glue that's keeping it all together somehow. Somehow, despite our own imperfections, there's something that keeps us together. But I was having a great conversation the other day with some other Lakota artists, and we were talking about the idea that the English word love, in our language, we do not have like a direct translation. And so we do not understand love in the same way. The way that we say love, as I understand it, to say I love you in our language is the more accurate way of translating is to say I cherish you. Or another way to say it is I like you very good. And I love that. I love that. You know why? I love it because, well, first of all, I have a horrible love life. Like, it's like, what happened to my life? I don't know. I can't sort it out. Anyway, so I've had so many ups and downs and things. Okay, but the reason I love that is because I'm always like, you know, trying to understand this great mystery, especially the Western idea of love, right? So many philosophers and poets have written about it. But I think really, and it wasn't long ago that I learned that I thought I was saying I love you in our language, and then I learned that it's more like I cherish you or I like you very good. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Because if I just have to like you very good, like, I can manage that. I can sustain that. That's doable, you know? Like, it's a feeling. Yeah. It's a feeling we can handle. Can I love you in those Western ways? I loved you a long time ago like that. That's over. But I like you, you know, we can do that. So,
I was thinking about how I did have a couple of questions for you, and if I'm a little bit seem tired, it's because I just finished my dissertation on Thursday, July 20th, and then came here and have been doing rehearsals. So I'm thank you. So I'm a little bit still, like doing this, and being here. But I was thinking in the images that I showed, so I wanted to talk about materiality just briefly because, I mean, I always love for you to be in conversation with you. It's always incredibly delightful and you know, stretches my thinking and stretches me as a person. But I think in this instance, Dwayne invited you, Dwayne Linklater, to come, and then luckily somehow I got in there to be able to be in conversation. And so as I'm sort of responding to the exhibition, I've been thinking about how time also lives in the materiality of the exhibition, which is on the second floor if you haven't seen it, and how he's using materials like sumac, or berries, or tea leaves to dye, or charcoal that comes from an actual fire, not that he bought at the store, but that he spent time with that fire spent time with him, and then he used that charcoal, which was like the residue of this time that he was on the land. And so for me, the land and time are very, very present in that exhibition. So I don't know if it's a question, but I was thinking about how there's the residue of our lived experience, which is about time and which is often about the land or the people that we cherish. that's present in the work. You know, it's a trace of him, it's a trace of his time, it's a trace of his life, but it's also a trace of the animal that gave its life that is a fur coat in the exhibition, or it's a trace of the life of that sumac tree and so that's how I've been thinking about it. It's the trace of the life of that fire. And I guess I wonder if that resonates at all in your own thinking, in terms of the way in which you write. And I guess what I'm really trying to get at is a question about your process. Like, can you talk a little bit more about process? And maybe this question feels not relevant, but that's kind of how I'm trying to get there, is to think about the residue or the trace and the way in which the work cites that. You know, it's like a gesture towards it. This is something I often think of, and I don't know if that's as present for you.
The way in which the work cites what?
Like, well, I guess memory or the residue, like how he's using in the material. There's like, for me, there's a citation of that life, but also a citation of time. Yeah.
And process. Process. Canadian process. Okay. Well, first of all, can I just talk about Dwayne's work first? What I really wanted to say that I appreciated, and I appreciate this in a few other friends' works, like some of my Native friends. I thought of Michaela Patton. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a young Oglala artist. And what she does is she makes handmade paper boxes, and they have these long, I'm just thinking of these particular works, these long pieces of leather fringe that come down from the boxes. And I was there with her when she was making using porcupine quill. She actually hired my kid to clean the quills. They were stinky. And so, and then she had the quills coming out of the panels of the boxes. And so really what she was doing is just taking these materials that are just timeless, which I felt also in Dwayne's exhibit. These materials that our people have been familiar with for millennia, thousands of years, and just exploding it, basically, making something new. And what I imagine whenever I'm like in the presence of this kind of work, like whether it's Dwayne or Michaela, another one is Diani, I kind of think that if there's any relatives or ancestors on the other side looking, I just always imagine them having a smile, like, oh my God, that's so cool. Why didn't we think of that 1,000 years ago? So, I sense, that's what I was thinking today in upstairs, maybe the delight, that maybe, who knows, but I was thinking, oh, maybe, I wonder if Dwayne's relatives on the other side are just looking with joy and at the way that he's using some of those materials and bringing it into, using them in a new way. Yeah.
So the question is about process.
Process.
But there's another way I could ask it, if that's okay, because you mentioned Diani.
Yeah.
So the work that I showed is titled Grasses, Grasses, Grasses. That was at the Aishi Triennial. It was a work of mine of Gookum scarf sculptures, which here's one, or a scarf. But I've made a series of these Gookum scarf sculptures in different locations. And in that one, I asked your permission to to title it that because that's a phrase as one word repeated 3 times, grasses, grasses, grasses. And yeah, it was interesting because I remember you sending me some grass poems, like a range of grass poems. Mm-hmm. And they were, it's like the way in which you understand grass, it's incredible. And I know it has to do with your homelands and this like relationship to the grasses, and which is different from my own experience. Mm-hmm. So I really like deeply love this kind of way in which you're in relation to grasses. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that phrase, and maybe that's a way to talk about process, maybe not, but yeah, I wanted to offer that.
Oh, I remember you mentioned this, yesterday. And I think that we're getting close to time, so this is a great thing maybe to talk about. So that phrase, grasses, 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 comes from the opening of my book titled Whereas. So it opens with 3 lines that says, now make room in the mouth for grasses, grasses, grasses. And then it moved throughout the book. There's a return to this image of the grass and the grasses, especially of the plains area, northern plains area. And there's also a piece titled 38, in which I write about the Dakota 38. I want to say probably the apex of that piece is where there is a white trader who, during the Sioux uprising, he was assassinated, this trader, and by the Lakota warriors, or Dakota warriors, I should say. And because he was famous for saying, if they're hungry, the Dakota people were not getting their money. So he said, if they're hungry, let them eat grass. And so when the Sioux uprising happened, he was one of the first assassinated. And when they found him, his mouth was stuffed with grass. So that was a moment that, as a young person, when I heard that story, I was like, wow. OMG, I like that. I don't know, anyway. But, so the opening of the book where I say, make room in the mouth for grasses, grasses, grasses. A lot of people have interpreted that as a prelude to that piece, or sort of an alluding towards this kind of retribution. Yeah. But actually that came from a very different place. And it came from, I also work visually, so it came from a visual exhibit that I had. I participated in an exhibit titled Pete Oyate, which is buffalo people. And we understand the buffalo as like our first relatives. And so I had done this piece where I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, it's like a figure, like life-size dress form. And I made a buffalo robe, very artistic interpretation. But, and inside that dress form, I hung these little panels of paper. And all of those pieces of paper had our family names with the word bull in it. Because bull is not a cow, it's in our culture, it's referring to the buffalo. Yeah. So I had all the families that carry that kind of relationship. And on the back, I had those words. I said, this is the book I have always wanted to I've always wanted to write something like that. And then I said, now make room in the mouth for grasses. And it was in meditation about our connection to the buffalo and buffalo people and to the grasses and our sense of place and origin. So that's actually where those lines and that phrase came from. Yeah, from our people. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that with everybody, because now I know that story. I didn't know that story before. But I feel like I had a sense of it, maybe. Like I had a sense of this like deep relationship that you have to grasses, this kind of understanding of it and relationship to it that I don't have. Yeah.
I do want to say, though, grass is not always so romantic.
Yeah.
So I was just up north this summer for some things, and in South Dakota. And you have to watch out for those grasses. They're sharp. They're sharp. There's things in there. There's snakes.
Oh.
You have to watch out. And like I went to visit one of my relatives, and they didn't. They're at their house. They don't mow. So literally, the grass was like this high. And we got out of the car, and there was like 8 million mosquitoes. Oh my God! And there's like bull snakes. Oh my God! It's not romantic.
No,
no. It's like I like to look at it, but I don't.
Yeah. But that's why you need the bison there, because they like.
Yeah, they
would. They would keep it
natural lawnmowers.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Layli. I'm so glad that we could be in conversation, and thank you all for being here.